let me jump into the first session and introduce you to our amazing panelists. In this first session, we're going to be talking about how to turn talent data into talent intelligence. We've got an amazing group with us. We're joined by Jeremy Shapiro, who's an Associate Vice President of Workforce Analytics at Merck & Co. We've got Arun, I'm going to get this wrong now, Chidambaram, Global People Analytics Leader at GE Healthcare. Stephanie Murphy, who's the Head of People Insights and Assessments at DELL Technologies. We've got Ankit, Saxena, who's the People Analytics and Workforce Planning Leader at MassMutual. And last, but certainly not least, we've got Harari, who's the Vice President of People Analytics, Research and Technology at Intuit. Welcome, everyone. How are you all? Nice to see you. Thank you for those of you that got up really early. Let's jump straight in. I'm going to, Arun, I'm going to pick on you first, if that's okay. What are some of the challenges that you're encountering when it comes to talent intelligence, and how are you working to solve it within your organization?
Yeah, thanks, Chris, and really appreciate for this opportunity, and great to see this amazing panel here. I'll put it in 3 simple points, and then I'll try to double click if I can. The first is around what I see is this whole concept of data, right? Data is, we've been saying this for a long time, but data is getting complex by the day. It's getting bigger. We are targeting like business data, external data. So there is actually this challenge around how to use that data. And what happens is we hire researchers, but they're basically data engineers in disguise. So 70% of the time, we're spending data like cleansing it, cleaning it. So there is actually a very high demand for that group. And what happens is we kind of miss that opportunity. There are the forward-looking companies are looking at like a chief data officer within HR. It's not like sitting in the IT. There's an interesting space, which is a very big challenge from getting the job done. The second is there is this level of awareness of people analytics. You know, see, analytics is equally about asking questions as it's about solving them. And what happens is this dexterity of analytics is not to the level it should be. And there is a big opportunity in that space. And what I say is that you got to raise the bar of HR in basic statistics, right? So I'm not talking about like doing the deep dive data science, which our teams do, but just to get to know that. And what happens is there is also another challenge I'm not sure if my other panelists have, which is we tend to be like chasing perfection. And it's actually what happens on both sides of the mix. My data science team does that. The HR team also does that. Sometimes, a directionally correct and a precisely wrong answer is okay. So this is this debate between value and effort. We kind of get lost. And the third piece, I think I want to hear this from my fellow panelists as well. I call that the last mile problem. We do a very good job of getting the output, but we don't do a good job at least converting that into an outcome. And what business really cares is about outcome. And what happens in this output to outcome is like, for example, we say that why attrition happens, we kind of do the causes of attrition. But when it comes to taking action, the after action review, who does it? Is it the business responsible to do it? The business partner responsible to do it? And the credibility of our team gets lost in that point. So I think I'm very interested in that last mile conversion, and there's a big opportunity. So those are the 3 places where I think we see some of our potential opportunities. And what we're trying to do is we have stretch assignments within HR so that HR members can come with us, go through an entire people analytics project. We just wrapped up one where rather than training them and putting them in a class, they just experience what my team goes through and what that process is. And that is helping. We have not scaled that yet, but I think that's a great way of teaching the rest of HR on what we do, and they at the same time learn. So I just want to pause there and see what others have to say.
Yeah, I may add maybe a couple of things. I love, Arun, your answer, your perspective, maybe just 2 to add. One is the data quality. In particular, when we talk about talent intelligence is mainly external, unlike other HR data that is internal, that we have more control of, more governance, and we have the ability to make it better. When we talk about talent intelligence, it's primarily external, and as such, it's not always up to date. In many cases, it is self-reported. So the data quality is a challenge one of the ways to overcome it is to just triangulate. Don't trust just one data source. Use several. Arun, I love your point about confidence level. It will never be 100%. And we need to educate our partners what is good enough to make a decision versus try to get into 100% that in the world of talent intelligence, very challenging and in some cases not even feasible.
So this is Ankit. Definitely, I think from my perspective, this is a very interesting question just because I have had the opportunity to live through this in multiple journeys where we have seen how the challenges from the talent intelligence perspective come across. And I think from my perspective, I would definitely say is that it depends upon the evolution of the people analytics function and kind of the challenges that you face. Because when I started here at MassMutual or even in my past experience, what I noticed is that some challenges at the start or the very initial stages were very different compared to when you are in the middle stages of the function setup or in the later stages. For example, like when I looked at it, when I started this function here at MassMutual, there was a kind of a difference in terms of how we are kind of data governance issues, the issues pertaining to the common language of the KPIs metrics. Those were the kind of a very basic starting point or the fundamental points. And then as we kind of evolved over a period of time, then the major issue was kind of creating an education around the different things, right? Because people have a lot of things available, but the lack of education is a kind of a challenge. But now if we look at in a much more advanced stage, the next issue is how you integrate the different data points, because there are so many data points as Arun alluded to that there are a lot of data sets available, a lot of KPIs, a lot of metrics, but what exactly is the story? And then the demand and the appetite from the leadership also is like, okay, I get that what is happening with the internal data, but how do you integrate with the external piece of the information? So that's where you kind of remove the emotions through the facts that you are telling to the leaders. So that's where I think the major challenge comes in. And of course, I think Arun and I kind of on the same boat is that the last mile connectivity, right? That kind of a thing, which is always a challenge. How you do a great job. And sometimes you get lost in like a precision versus the accuracy kind of a thing. But I think that's where I have always been mandating that as long as you're directionally correct, and directionally correct is not just in the opposite direction, that's where you kind of validate with your external benchmarks. You kind of compare with respect to what is happening in the industry and connect with that dots. So that's where we always focus upon that rather than you being 100% precise. Even if you are 90% accurate, I'll go with that because we are not like in the medical sciences where you have to be like 100% accurate, precise on matters like that. So that's where we are kind of doing it. And the other piece is definitely the last mile connectivity. That's where we are hoping that we can build a kind of a trust with the leadership, as well as we are working with the senior leadership, is that kind of building that culture in the organization that you believe that the people data is kind of taking the decision for you in how effectively you manage your workforce. And that's where the part of the trust and the credibility and also the culture of the democratization of the data is a major role playing in terms of how we adopt to this new culture and use this data to basically take our workforce decisions.
Yeah, I would agree with everything that everyone says so far. I agree that it definitely depends on where you're at on the journey. I'm actually going to take a different spin because I think our biggest challenge has really been debunking myths and grounding ourselves in how things really show up at DELL. And I'll break that down about what I mean, but it's kind of like when we set our roadmap for the year, we plan all these cool and amazing projects and we're super excited to go tackle them. And then all of a sudden there's this flurry of LinkedIn posts about a great resignation. Oh, wait, no, it's a great reshuffle. Oh, wait, no, it doesn't really exist, right? And then the next week you go and it's like quiet quitting and quiet firing and all these buzzwords and terms. And then an article comes out that says hybrid work doesn't really exist and it doesn't really work and you can't feel the culture and it creates in-groups and out-groups and new team members will leave the company. And so we see all these trends and our leaders are all seeing all these trends. And I think our job as people analytics experts is to calm down all the spinning and all the responses to the external noise and, oh my gosh, people are going to leave and we need to go back into the office. And so we've been spending a lot of our time debunking this with data and facts We found that in our hybrid workplace, there really are no meaningful differences in promotion and performance for remote versus on office-based workers. Our new team members feel just as included as our more tenured team members, and they're at no greater risk of attrition either. We also found that our culture and our values are the top differentiators. So whether you're remote or not. And so we've been able to kind of just take all of these things that are happening externally and really figure out, okay, what are our team members telling us? What does the data show for our team members specifically? And so I think our biggest challenge has been to be agile, to make sure that we have the mechanisms and the technology and the data in place to quickly react and respond to hot topics in a way that amplifies the voices of our team members over just all the external trends that constantly pop up.
Stephanie, thanks for bringing that up. That's all. It so resonate with that idea too. No matter where we are in the analytics journey, all of us have probably felt this higher velocity of the pace of business, of the pace of challenges, of the reactivity that we're seeing to the outside world. So one of the things that we talk about as a team is how do you balance? How do you balance in between myth busting and medium and long-term projects? How do we make sure that we can translate with enough context what you just saw in the press with something that we already had on the shelf because they just use different words? So quiet quitting. So every industrial and organizational psychologist is of course, we understand this very, very well. It's very clever marketing of IO words. So how do you then repurpose that agilely in a way that helps to either allay concern or, in a really, really great case, how do we use that to have a better conversation? Now that we have your attention, can we talk about these three features that we notice and that we really think are a big part of the problem? It would not shock anyone to hear that that managers and your local manager still has an enormous influence on engagement and retention. Every single bit of your data that you probably looked at inside of this entire listening audience will say the same thing. Let's have those conversations. So I love this idea that Stephanie brought up here, and where we can use that to open things up and maybe break up the static a little bit on topics that we want to make progress in.
How do you communicate back to the leaders in the organization? Are you getting all of these demands, and how do you manage that from a communication perspective?
Judiciously and not all at once. Right? It's right. Like, I don't know what you guys think. It's this thought of no, don't worry about it. Well, obviously that's not going to be a case too, but for me, I love sending notes on these types of things at non-crazy rush times. Like, I'm not sending a note about this right before an investor relations call. I'm not sending a note about this, on a Monday morning when someone is. So really, timing sometimes I think has a huge impact.
So I would agree. And I also think that a big piece of it is engraving it into everyday kind of processes. Like, we'll send out a communications, like we call it our manager essentials email, that has a bunch of different things managers have to do, but then squeeze in a data point there, squeeze in some research, and try and find ways to integrate it. You're having your performance review. Oh, did you know that we found our team members value these conversations, right? And so finding ways to integrate it as they're doing their work.
Yeah, I love that. That's a very good way of doing it, right? And it comes in the kind of flow of work, right? You're constantly educating and myth busting in a very organic way, as opposed to dealing with every individual person one by one.
Yeah, I think it also depends on how these keep coming, but I think the more fundamental question is, how do you prioritize work? So has to be, everyone has their own mechanism, right? So the way we operate, at least I'm blessed with some leaders. And our CHR is very clear when this whole attrition thing came. She said, is this really a problem? So the way you prioritize matters. So we are very clear on what we're working on. These incidents come, and the chances are these are pretty big. Actually, this whole thing started right at the pandemic in 2020. So there was a big, it's a world discussion, right? Every CEO was wondering about that. So it was not something out of the box. When this, in April of 2021 was our inflection point on this, where our levels went up. And they said, like, what's going on? So we kind of chased it a little early. I agree with Stephanie about this quiet quitting. Like, at least I have leaders who are not jumping and saying, just go do something about it. There may be some discussion when there's, but the board is asking, or that could be some scenarios. But at least it absolutely is, you have to be very clear on how you prioritize work. Are you aligned to where the business direction is? And how does this impact it? And thankfully, attrition was a problem internally for us, and we were using that in many other forms, just not for Great Resignation, right? We were using in other spaces. For example, our digital workforce, we were seeing talent leak. So it we tried to see that is digital getting more impacted rather than just doing a blanket for the entire organization. So I think that word of how and it is a challenge, Chris, it's prioritizing this work is very, very tricky. And that at least helped me, relieve some of the pain of this constant shocks of what the external market or LinkedIn are saying.
Mm-hmm. Chris, the question about communication is so key because this is the last part of analytics, to communicate your finding, your data, your insight. So important, and we need to be very deliberate of how much we do it, to Jeremy's point, when we do it, to Stephanie's points, how we can maybe integrate it versus create a separate communication. Which channels are you using? Are you using Slack? Are you using a meeting? Are you using the portal of the company? You need to be very deliberate about what you communicate, how you communicate, to who you communicate. And in quite a few occasions, what you can do is leverage the community of HR partners and have them be the communicators, make them shine, equip them with the knowledge they need in order to communicate to the rest of the organization. So as an example, we have our own specific channel with all the HR business partner. Any research finding, big insight, we are leveraging that channel and sometimes joining a forum to present. Here the facts, by the way, data versus those news myth that Stephanie was mentioning. Here is some data to equip them of, well, you're hearing it out there, but here are the effects of what happened within our company. Here is how it looks like in reality. Here's how we see it. And then you can have lots of other ambassadors to communicate the message versus having one single team to be the one to broadcast for the rest of the company. Someone asked in the chat, what's the best way you communicate in terms of a format? Is it like a long presentation? Is it a one slide? What have you found to be the most effective way to get this information across? Because I've seen pitch decks that are 20 pages long where no one's going to look at it. I've seen, dashboards where it's super complicated. But to be interested, I think that's quite a good question.
So I'll offer one thought, which is know your audience. I know it's intuitive, but we do actually think about translating messages into in the way the product manager thinks about audience management too. So what's your target market? How do they consume? What's the best way for them to make a decision? So to the C-suite, it might be a 3-line email. To an entire employee population, we like white papers here. So for us, sometimes it's a white paper, or it could be a podcast, but it depends on your audience. So that's my nugget for this too, is differentiate your messaging depending on who's consuming it.
I think absolutely, Jeremy, this is exactly the approach that we also take here. And I think knowing the audience is absolutely important. And I think it is also important to create a curiosity, right? So when you are sharing some of the buzzwords or some of the things that are happening, depending upon the executive leaders, or you are meeting the layer down or 2 layers down, that's where you kind of massage your message accordingly, right? Generally, I think for the HR PPs or where you are meeting with the talent management people, you kind of provide them the important nudges and tell them that this is something which is coming up. And also same for the senior leaders, where we are kind of going through with a very brief kind of exactly what has happened and why it is important. And then what could be the potential outcomes from there, which is going to impact your organization in such a way And that's where you kind of talk about what possible recommendations could be if in case it is really getting the traction and kind of an acknowledgement from our part. So that's where I think it is very important how you kind of communicate. And of course, it varies based on the kind of the audience you have. So completely agree, Jeremy, what you said here.
Yeah, I completely agree with what Jeremy and Ankit is saying. But Chris, we've tried on the panel, we've tried a new method. I'm trying a new method too over the last probably 12 to 18 months. What we try to do is when you solve a problem, right, it's not that we go in our analytical den and not talk to rest. So we have like the first step is we have a research paper. We literally read, what is your problem? We spend time with business, we spend time with HR, who are the stakeholders are. Then we get into data, then we go to our analytical, hideout, do all that. But what we've started doing is have the team along with us, so that when it comes to the storytelling part, they exactly know what the story is, because they're part of this journey too. So they're learning as well as they're feeding us information, right? And when you work on bigger projects with business, you have to know the business. You just cannot be depending on a business partner telling you or someone else telling you, because you will work with the business. For the larger audience, what we also try to do is when we did this workplace analytics on meeting behaviors, we do a pre-show before the whole story starts for the all HR. We actually go in a town hall and say, this is what this project is all about. So your feed, this is how you'll participate. So we don't wait till the end. We actually go right in the beginning. We go 2 sessions, and halfway through, when we have the first cutout of the results, we say, this is where we are. So we're kind of stitching that throughout the process. So when it comes to the end, you don't have to wait to tell everyone, because they probably know 60 to 70% of what's already gone. Not scaled it, but I think it's definitely making a big impact.
I think that's really interesting, because for each person, they need to really understand, what does it mean for me? If you're kind of just putting it out there very broadly, and those leaders don't understand what does it mean for them, what individually, their organization, etc., and they don't know the context, and you're just coming to them with the end result, it's kind of going to miss the mark along the way. What would you say is the future of talent intelligence? What do you think are the skills and the tech that people need? And I think I also want to ask, what can CHROs do to help support this?
Happy to chime in a bit. So, because of what we all do, we should be able to forecast skills for the future. Part of our job, many of us are probably working on a skills basis. So there's a couple of things that are coming to mind. And one is that as we're able to more precisely break down the types of skills we need, we can challenge all of our assumptions about working in analytics today. If we think about the types of skills that we're using today versus what we used 10 years ago, they're radically different. Sometimes they're the same, but we use a different word for it too. My sincere hope is that technology and ubiquity of technology inside of a manager's lens and an employee's lens is able to release a lot of the easily identifiable patterns, so that a manager or an employee can see the pattern before anyone else. If I'm given a choice between having 65,000 people know 2 things or 100 people know 10 things, I know how we can move a company too. And like Microsoft My Analytics is a nice example of this, right? It's a very micro view, off the shelf. I understand it can manage my own collaboration. It's got a huge, huge potential. So what does that mean for us? In analytics, it means that we're able to work on the different patterns that no one else can identify and then articulate to influence. So there's always going to be another hurdle, another curve. And what I'm hoping for all of us is that we can heavily invest in the technology to allow kind of what is state of the art today turns into standard work tomorrow, so that we can then pave the next tranche. That's kind of my overall hope.
So from my perspective, this is definitely a very bright future for the talent intelligence if you look upon. And I think with time, what we definitely gonna see is that predicting the skill sets that are required. And I think for us, eventually, to be successful, it is important how you kind of democratize the data, I think. And that's where not having the data at the right time, or not having the insights to the managers or to the employees at the right time, is of not really a value, right? So that's where we always try to make sure that data is not limited only, or the stories are not limited only to a certain set of people, but it is kind of available across the organization. For example, if a manager has to take some sort of a decision on the hiring, how quickly you can make it available to that manager, that is where that person can take a decision. Same goes with the employees, right? So if I build a development plan and I want to build upon certain skill sets, if in a timely manner, you can let that employee know that these are the courses or these are the trainings that are available for you so that you can build your skill sets for a period of time, that's where you can really create value. So that's where the artificial intelligence, how you create nudges for your employees and managers, that's where real value comes in. And of course, I think from my point of view, how the CHROs can help, definitely, I think that they are kind of the forefront of it, right? Because we feed the data, we feed a lot of stories to them, and how they can really push it with their peers, as well as how they can build that culture across the organization of the data. Because if it comes from the top, then automatically it creates a value for everyone, and everyone is kind of listening that, yeah, before we make any workforce strategic decisions, we have to look upon data rather than we have certain emotions, and based on that, we take a call on that. So that's how you kind of democratize data, make sure that you kind of create value for the managers and for the employees at the right time. And CHROs can help us by making sure that we create that culture across the organization of using the people data before making any decisions.
You know, Ankit, I love your point, and maybe I will build upon it. Today, for the most part, the way we do our business is we have a lot of data. We sift through it, we filter it, we sometimes connect different points, and then we use the HR organization to activate it and to make sure that people will use it and make decisions and leverage the insights. The future, which will be a challenging one, but we can all help shape it, will be great if it is all productized. It is scalable so that every manager, every employee have the access as much as possible real time for this data, and they can really leverage it into the point of not just knowing what's out there, but actually making the right decisions and making the right actions in a prioritized manner. There's so much, there's probably too much information out there. How can we really filter it to the critical things and make it very accessible and help managers make these decisions, and also employees? That could be the next level of talent intelligence. How to productize it, I think it's a challenge for us within this industry. Not easy, but as technology evolves and we have more tools out there that can make this type of information more accessible, we can definitely think about how can we make this decision more real time, more predictive, and more relevant, so that it's not only data and insight, but it's action being taken upon this data.
Because we're doing this already with our customers. So what's stopping us from doing this with our people? Or do you think it's not there just yet, the technology?
I think the technology is there. I think it's improving and it's getting better, and the automation is there. I definitely think that it's only going to get better over time. We're going to perfect it more, but I think it's there. And that's why my answer to this question about the skills that we need in the future is less about technology and automation and more about storytelling. And so what I mean by that is, like, we need storytellers. Like, I think about even when we're little, right? We're told the stories and fables and things like that. Like if we were just told there were 3 little pigs, period, that's it. You're like, okay, well then what's the rest of it? What's the context? And then, but when we're told, like, but then there were straws and one built a house out of sticks and there was a big bad wolf, and then we're all like sitting on the edge of our chairs, like, okay, tell me more. It's the same thing with data. If we were to just put up a chart that says, look, our attrition trends are decreasing, everyone's like, okay, and like, what's the context? What's the detail? What's the story? What's the more? What's my next step? What action do I take from this? And so I think we've got to get storytellers that can do not just the data part, but tell the story, because the technology is there. It can help us create all the data. We need people behind the scenes to kind of share what's the story, paint the picture, not just through words, but through visuals. And just I always tell my team, like, when we're putting together, most of our deliverables are in PowerPoint. And I make it like a children's book, show pictures and visuals and tell a story here. Because I think that's the part that's going to be needed the more technology and things become more advanced.
Stephanie, we'd have fun together. So I do something similar with our team too. I just want to emphasize one point is storytelling is learnable. So for our entire teams, as you're bringing folks on, great success. HRBPs are also wonderful storytellers. So you can leverage the skills that you have. And I love that you said storybook as well. So there is a technique that we use sometimes when we're stuck. We just start with once upon a time. Now, I won't say that in front of a very senior audience. We're all friends here.
That would be amazing if you said that. I'd love that. Once upon a time.
But sometimes when you get stuck, you don't know where to go. Start the way we started as kids. It's a great, Stephanie's resonant on this, a really great technique.
I completely agree with what the team is saying around storytelling. But on this question about the future of this space, if you really look 3 to 4 years ago, Chris, this function was a luxury, and now it's becoming a business need. Yeah. And any leader who's thinking that we are still a luxury is, I think, late in this game, in this race, in my humble opinion. And most of the CHROs are making that point very clear, right? So there are 3 things which I feel the future will lead. One is what I call homogeneity of this function. If you really look at the screen, we may have different structures. We are probably reporting to different folks. And the way we do our business, we somehow get together, get deliver the outcome. So I think as the space becomes more a seat at the table, it'll be more homogeneous. Like there will be one way of doing things, and that is getting closer and closer and closer. If you look 3 years ago, probably we're more disintegrated as we are today. So that's one spot. The second, I think that Stephanie mentioned about and how you said about, there is this concept of intelligent systems, because that's what the business is doing, right? When you talk about digital transformation, they're really talking intelligent systems, and that will be applicable to us. And sometimes we cannot be complacent that we will be doing everything, because like Jeremy said, there will be companies coming in. When you have everything data, you can actually predict. You don't need like a data scientist to do that, right? So we need to be a little tricky on how we leverage our space. We still are required. There's a lot of things this team can do. So it'll be important for a leader to understand what pieces can this team should really do versus what can be outsourced through a technology. And technology will come, maybe not in the next 3 years, but at least in the 6, 7 to 10 years, I will be surprised if it doesn't, right? And the third is this marriage between analytics and technology, because every technology, if anyone has been to Vegas a few weeks ago, all they're selling is analytics. So if you are structurally, technology and analytics are not talking to each other, and that's another lost opportunity. And the future will be that will be bundled in together. And from a CHRO's point of view, I completely agree with Ankit put. It's just we need the sponsorship, we need a voice, we need thoughtful investment from that community. And if you really look at, I know Jeremy is lucky to have in that elite group, if on an average you have the ratio of us, our teams to the organization is 1 to 2,500. That's what the world class is doing. And many are not there. So that will be another space on how do you build this group together collectively and have a strategic seat in business decision making. So that's kind of where I feel very promising, and many companies are going in that direction.
One of the questions that came up a few times in the chat is, how do you actually, once you get these insights, these outcomes, how do you actually make sure that you can work with HR so that they're actually ready to action the plan and deliver it correctly? Any advice on how they can better work with their HR leader to make sure this is then translated into action?
I'll defer to the rest of the team, but I just want to make one comment. A lot of our observations aren't for HR. So think about our audience too. So we talk a lot internally about, are we doing something for you or to you? Mm. I find that to be a very helpful litmus test, but I'll defer to the team.
That's a great point. It's a very great point.
I would maybe even add, Jeremy, maybe with you.
There you go. Even better. I love it. Right. I'm adding that.
Yeah.
Plus two.
Yeah, because we want to partner with them at times to deliver a message or an insight. I can actually use, talking about stories, one question we got when I just joined the company a few years ago. The company was debating about spans and layers. Are we structured correctly? Do we have enough the span right? Do we have the right structure in the organization? And that was a question that many business leaders had, and a lot of them already formed a point of view with no data, just their own opinion, their own experience over the years. And our job was, let's wrap it into something consumable that both the HR partners, and then to the point that was made also to the business leaders, to be able to consume and know, here it is, here is the data, and now you can make actions with it. By the way, just the bottom line was, it doesn't matter. It didn't matter to engagement, to retention, to attraction. The spend and their structure did not make a big difference as it relates to the metrics that we care about or the outcomes that we care about. But before that, there were lots of perception and misperception of how important it is to have, as an example, a ratio of 1:7 or 1:5 direct reports, which some believed that it will help productivity, help engagement, help remove attrition. So at times, our job is to wrap it into the right communication package to be consumed. And then either it could be through the HR business partners, and in some cases, to go directly to the business and educate them about your data. Here's how it looks like by different groups. And therefore, here is the conclusion.
I totally agree with that. I was thinking of something that we've been doing recently is creating what we call tip sheets. And it's just all the research and science and data we do behind the scenes, but then we up-level it to just 4 things of like, here's 4 key tips to go do. Like the one we did recently was 4 ways to create a connection during a hybrid world. And of course, there's tons of data and science behind it, but all they see is just these 4 key things they can go do to help build connection across their teams. And we sent it to leaders and HR business partners. And it's been a great hit because it's something that's so simple. And so to your point of consumable and packaging and making sure it's something that people can use. And even though we love all the data and the science behind it, it doesn't always have to be at the forefront, right? And so simplifying it a little bit so that people can just see something. Here's very clear 4 actions I can now go take and do.
That's what they want, right? That's what they really want. They don't want to sit there and read through the research. You might think they want to, but they don't. It's them getting those as a manager, you've already got enough to deal with. So if I got an email saying here are the 4 tips that I can do, I'm going to be much more likely to take action on that as well. Love that.
Yeah. On that question, right? I mean, I'll put a direct answer. I think HR does a lot. So I'll give you a very practical example. When attrition was happening, we got hit by people said compensation and career development and the standard ones, like, HR is not doing. But if you really dig deeper, we were looking at the market. Our TR team did a fantastic job of like really looking the market medians when the impact of Great Resignation, and they took charge on that. That was an action. When you talk about career development, I'm not talking about just a G, but when I look at my prior jobs too, HR does a phenomenal job. There are programs they put it in place. See, the problem is these are not like the next day, it will not come on, you will not get the fruit the next day. It takes some time, right? But they do take action. We have like bonuses, which are going at certain level, it expanded to a deeper level. So there are actions which are taken, which are measurable, right? It's like, but the problem is you cannot, if you look at reasons for attrition, there are maybe 50 different reasons. You cannot solve every darn reason there, because you just cannot. You just have to look what is the maximum, what can be scalable, what can be done. And I think these are very practical places where people, the HR team, like really puts their effort. And I have to give kudos to the team. So it's very visible and, is measurable too.
Yeah, one thing I will add from my side is that I think the mindset that, the people analytics team or talent acquisition or the HR BPs are kind of working in silos, right? So that's something which should not be there. Like if you are presenting any kind of an analytics or any kind of an outcome to the HR BPs and there is an execution plan which is to be shared and executed upon through the implementation of it, if it is not succeeding, this is just not the failure from one side of the story, but it is kind of failure across the board. So presenting the team, not just like a HR BP doing this job or talent acquisition, talent management doing, but it is kind of a group responsibility here. So that's an important piece for me, just because when we kind of plan for something, we just make sure that we are kind of working with each department within the HR through and through, not just leaving it, providing our findings and get away from there and doing nothing in terms of the implementation. So that's where we just make sure that we kind of work with them through and through, and also kind of evaluate what is happening over a period of time, right? So for example, if we say that, this is an issue where we are not doing enough recognition, there is learning and development is an opportunity, or the AIP or the bonuses that you are distributing is kind of vanilla distribution, this is not a proper distribution. That's where we find out the hot spots and trends and kind of pass it along to the HRBPs so that they can execute. And then over a period of time, you keep on working with that. You just don't leave it there, but you kind of take it to the fruition and you say that, okay, this is where we found the issue and that has been tackled or not tackled, right? So whatever the interventions are required, you plan accordingly.
I think before I let everyone go, what would be your parting advice to the audience on this topic of talent intelligence? Because we've covered so much already. I'll start with you, Jeremy, if that's all right.
Wherever you are in the journey, you can add great value to your organization. This is all about influence. It's all about making a difference. Pick great questions. Pick impactful questions. No matter how many resources you have, you can solve something today. And so that's my challenge to you. Go and solve something.
I've been in this space for almost 15 years now. So where it started to where it is now, it's an exponential growth of this function, and there's a lot more to be done. Jeremy, that's a fantastic advice. Like, it doesn't matter in what maturity level you are, there's always value. The only thing I would advise is to there will be a lot of noise. So there are three things I would leave words. You have to be very tolerant. You got to be very patient, and you need to influence. These are the three skill sets you need, because there'll be a lot of noise coming in. Things will not be right. Let it go. Please let it go. Just focus, but be tolerant, be patient, and have a very good influencing skills that will come very, very handy.
I would say, I think for the people analytics, depending upon whatever the stage you are in, just make sure that you are not trying to boil the ocean, that you are trying to fix everything. Identify what your priorities are and look upon from the effort, from the outcome perspective, what you need to really deliver with the organization, and always remain connected with your vision, strategic direction, and kind of going in the direction that you are making sure that you have the priorities very clearly identified that you want to work upon.
I want to say that we are all very fortunate to be part of an exciting, growing field of talent intelligence. So it's great to be part of an industry in an area that is keep on growing. I would probably combine a few of the things that my great peers here shared, which is focus on separating the signal from the noise. And once you find the critical few, be very focused on solving them in the right way to the end. And the end is for the business leaders to take that, act upon it, and make the right decision for the company.
I think the only thing I'd add is kind of what I've been echoing throughout some of my responses is to keep the people part at the forefront of people data. I think we can create all of our cool, fancy dashboards and techie charts, but the numbers don't substitute for real conversations and listening to stories. The numbers won't tell us, the quiet firing is going to pop up as on TikTok next week and be a trend. And so just remember that behind all the numbers, there's a ton of just people that we need to be focused on as well.